Hello, welcome back to Dungeons and Dragons Basics from Dice to Roleplay. Today we're going to be talking about something a little different. We're going to be switching from our own characters, stats, and stuff to enemies and NPCs, the other people in the game that aren't controlled by you, the player. These are the people who are controlled by the Dungeon Master. In Dungeons and Dragons, the enemies you fight, and every other character for that matter, is played by the Dungeon Master. Every creature, shopkeeper, grunt, dragon is voiced and played by the DM, who has their stats, backstories, and voices maybe for each. So the Dungeon Master has a lot of things going on. They have to prep a lot so that you can enjoy the game, right? You're focusing on just your character and your team. They have to build the world and all the characters in it. So thank you, DMs, for doing what you do. It's a lot of work. Thanks for that. NPCs are non-player characters. So basically anybody that's not a player, and that could be a character, an animal, a god, whatever. Anything that the players meet in game, they're an NPC. NPCs bring flavor to the game and can be fun to interact with. NPCs are tools for the DM to move along the plot and maybe add some levity or frivolity to the game. They could also use them to add in lore to the world you're trying to build together. Interactions with NPCs can be some of the most enjoyable and oftentimes hilarious parts of the game, right? You can go into a town and spend 2 hours talking to the barkeep instead of moving on. And for some people, that's really fun. For some DMs, it's really obnoxious. It kind of depends on who you're playing with. But that's what they're there for. It's part of the game. Enemies are the NPCs you battle within the game. They could be a town guard, an evil wizard, someone you meet out in the wilderness, or just the big bad evil guy / gal, which is often referred to as the BBEG, right? It's the bad person. It's the one. It's like if you're thinking like Harry Potter, it's Voldemort. Star Wars, Darth Vader, right? It's the guy that you're trying to defeat ultimately in the end of the game. Enemies are played by the DM, and they are responsible for having their stats, spells, abilities, and feats ready. The DM is playing these enemies in their best interest, not the interest of the players. The DM is trying to defeat you. They want evil to win. Enemies can scale in difficulty and can be leveled up to match players' levels. So the DM is trying its best to make a fair encounter for you. They're not trying to overwhelm you, right, which they easily could do. They're just trying to make a fair and fun game. Enemies have what's called a challenge rating that's associated with them. And this ranking system is meant to help DMs assess just how powerful these encounters are going to be compared to how strong your characters are. So it's basically a way to make it so that they don't just destroy you in battle. Challenge rating is calculated using XP and the monster's total XP. So there's a variety of tools and charts and online resources that help DMs ensure that their encounters are balanced. Due to how the game works, a large group of small monsters can be just as dangerous as one large enemy. And this is because of how many actions, right, they get. So because of that, right, if you've got 10 small enemies, that means they get 10 attacks on you compared to just the one bigger attack from a one big enemy, right? Players are limited in this way. So let's talk a little bit about how combat works, right? If we're talking about enemies, we got to understand how fighting happens. Combat in D&D is all based on initiative, or turn order. One round of fighting is 6 actual seconds of real time in the game. So for everybody to take one turn, that's 6 seconds. So that means that fights, if they only last a couple rounds, don't even take a minute long. So a lot of spells will have a time component on it, like how long does this last? If a spell lasts an hour, that is so many rounds of combat, right? 6 seconds, that means there's 10 rounds in a minute. 600, that's 600 rounds of combat. So that is a lot of combat. You'll never have to fight that long. There are lots of steps that go into combat. First of all, when the battle starts, your DM is going to ask you to roll initiative. That's rolling a d20, and you're going to add your initiative to it. After that, the DM takes care of what the order is, because he knows what the initiative of the enemies are, and he also knows your initiative. So he makes sure that everybody goes in turn. There are actions that you can do as a player, and also what the NPCs can do. They can move their characters based on their speed. They can take one action, and then they can do a bonus action. These are all different things that they're allowed to do. And there are like feats and abilities that let you do a little bit more sometimes. Occasionally, some creatures are so strong they are considered legendary creatures, and they get to do special legendary actions. These actions happen at the end of another creature's turn. And then there's also a layer action, which is kind of, which are similar, and they act on initiative 20. Layer actions are like the ground shaking and rocks falling from the ceiling, or like the caves crumbling around you, or there's a tidal wave coming at you. And then the order begins again until the battle ends. To attack in Dungeons and Dragons, you have to declare the target of your attack and then what you're going to attack with. So, example, you could say, like, I'm going to attack that goblin with my hammer. To see if you hit the target, you have to roll a d20 and then add a modifier. If your total is higher than the target's armor class, then you hit. If you roll a 20, that is considered a critical. So, for instance, if you roll 14 and your modifier is +3, and it's higher than the enemy's armor class of 14, that is a hit. If you roll low and your modifier doesn't quite get there, then you miss, so it means you whiffed. Now, if you tie, so if you get the exact same roll as the enemy armor class, that is also considered a hit. Afterwards, you roll damage, and damage rolls change based on what weapon, feats, and abilities your character have. Critical hits double the dice. So, for example, if you just have a regular hit with a hammer, you roll 2d8. And then whatever you get is the amount of hit points the enemy loses. Spell attacks work very similarly. However, right, your modify is calculated using a different stat. So, first of all, you're going to declare an attack, like I'm going to cast Fireball on the Kobold in front of me. You roll to see if you hit your opponent. So you'd roll a d20 and then add your modifier, and you'd compare it to the enemy's AC, and then you'd roll the damage listed in the spell description. Sometimes spells have what are called spell saves, and that means that enemies can save by rolling a dice, and if they pass the save, either they don't take any damage, they don't get hit with extra effects, or they take half the damage from the spell. Your spell save is based on your character sheet, so it's based off of your magic. Also, like in many other RPGs, there are special conditions that characters can get from attacks. Listed below are just some examples of conditions in Dungeons & Dragons, but there are so many. Blinded, for instance, makes it so that you can't see, and you fail ability checks that require seeing. So that means attacks against this creature have advantage, and this creature attacks have disadvantage, right? You're blinded, so you can't see, so you have disadvantage trying to hit things, and people know you can't see, so they have an advantage at hitting you, which means they get to roll 2 dice and see if they get above your AC. Frightened gives you disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls while the source of fear is near you, and you have to try to stay away from it. You're not allowed to move closer to the source of fear. There's other conditions, of course, like charmed, deafened, grappled, incapacitated, invisible, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, restrained, stunned, and unconscious. There are so many things that can happen to you in this game, right? Because we're trying to describe a battle, right? Lots of things can happen. One more thing we need to understand is exhaustion. This is just the place where I decided to put it. Exhaustion is a special condition that can be brought on by special circumstances, like starving, not having been sleeping, or exposure to the elements. Exhaustion is measured in 6 levels. If you have 1 level of exhaustion, you get disadvantage on all of your ability checks. If you have 2 levels, your speed is halved. If you have 3, you get disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. 4, you lose your hit point maximum by getting it cut in half. At 5, your speed is reduced to 0. And if you get to 6 levels of exhaustion, you die. And there are no saving throws for that. You are just dead. So let's take a look at an example combat round here. We've got several participants, 3 players, 3 kobolds, and a dragon. So everybody rolled their initiative, and player 1 got the highest, so they get 23 as their initiative. The kobolds are next, followed by a layer action, player 3, the dragon, and player 2. In round 1, player 1 would move towards a kobold and attack, but he misses. Then the kobolds get to move closer. They all surround player 1, only 1 attack hits, and they take 8 damage. There's a layer action, the cave shakes, everybody rolls a dexterity saving throw to not be knocked prone, all the players pass. Player 3 then gets to move. They move towards a kobold and attack with fireball. They hit, and they do 5d8 damage to all 3 kobolds in range. Then there's a legendary action. The dragon shoots flames at player 3 and deals a lot of damage. Then it's the dragon's actual turn. They slash at player 1 for some slashing damage. And then player 2 throws a spear at the dragon, hits, and does some more damage. And then the next round begins, and they continue on. So that's how a combat round would happen. Each player gets to do their things. So they move, they attack, and then if they had bonus actions, they would do a bonus action. And then the enemies get to do that. And then there might be a layer action or a legendary action. And they keep going around. And we just keep doing that until everybody's dead or whatever, right? The battle ends for whatever reason. Thank you so much for talking about enemies and NPCs with me. Now you know even more about Dungeons & Dragons, and next time we will continue our quest for ultimate Dungeons & Dragon knowledge. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon on Dungeons & Dragons Basics.